listening to With AI FM.
Welcome to Relationships with AI. I'm your host, Iyabo Oba, and welcome to another episode of the show. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Rola Aina, and she is a tech transformation consultant and also the founder of TurnTroop. And so, Rola, you're very welcome. Very excited to have you on. Please, would you like to?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Please, could you say a little bit about what you do? What is tech transformation consultancy about? And also tell us a bit more about your startup.
Sure. So as you said, my name's Rola. I'm a tech transformation consultant, firstly, and I spent most of my career helping sort of big global companies navigate change, usually fairly complex, and especially change where it comes to emerging technology. And throughout my career, I've always been in that sort of sweet spot where new tech meets, having to convert that to real business impact. And, been super passionate about kind of using innovation and using that to drive impact. I really believe that right now, this current wave of AI advancement is one of the biggest opportunities we've got to level the playing field across the world, both for companies and for, the disadvantaged in our society, which is really where TurnTroop came from. And the inspiration was effectively to level that playing field. So at TurnTroop, we help medium and large organizations adopt AI in a way that's responsible, scalable, and impactful. So currently building a platform that simplifies and structures AI adoption, but also we do that while creating meaningful social impact by tapping into a talent base that's primarily located in Africa.
Great.
The big mission is to make AI easy to adopt, seamless to scale, and built for lasting transformation. That's what we do.
Amazing. Well, looking forward to delving far deeper into what TurnTroop's about and also your expertise. But firstly, because it's relationships with AI, we love to kick off with that sort of angle and theme. And so my question to you is, what's been an important relationship in your life? And how has that relationship influenced or helped shape your decisions?
I think, without a doubt, the first, relationships that come to mind, the most important relationships in my life are with God and, with my parents, with my mum. My faith is, the compass that I sort of always return to. I'm a Christian. Jesus is my homeboy, but that's such a millennial reference. That's what popped into my mind. I'm showing my age, but
well, I mean, it comes to us all.
My relationship with God kind of shapes how I show up in the world, and it shapes, the kind of business that I'm trying to build. It grounds me in compassion and makes me want to lead with kindness, even when it's really hard. The most important thing I think is that it's the service element. I think what's really important for me is that, sometimes the kind of entrepreneur hustle, and especially in tech because of how quickly things move, service to others is kind of seen as like a distraction in terms of, yes, pure customer service that you can directly tie to sales. But more broadly for me, I think what my faith does is remind me that service to others is actually the success. It's not a distraction. It is the success of being in service to others. And in terms of my family, when I think about the most important relationship, I'm the only daughter in my family, so I'm very close to my mum. And Nigerian mums are very special people.
They are indeed. They
don't care about their children.
No.
So, no, there's a next level of support, like next level of pride. And, my mom thinks I'm the best thing since sliced bread. And, I think that kind of love fills you up. And it gives you sort of quiet power to move through the world with purpose and really believe that, not just that you can do things, but that you should. yeah, and I think she taught me generosity, she taught me how to be charitable, how to show up for others, all of things that are really, really big elements
Yeah.
of what I'm trying to build. Um, and my dad too, let's not leave him out.
Yeah, it's quite important to the process as well.
Yes. I think both of them just gave me a really like lovely balance of, deep encouragement, but really high standards.
Yes.
And yeah, like it just raised me to believe that I could and should do things. And,
Yeah.
I think that culturally, that layer of being Nigerian, it
Yes.
adds urgency to everything I do, because I look at Africa and I just see crazy potential.
Yes.
But I also see how charity alone can't solve systemic problems, as much as
Yeah.
charity is a core kind of value for me.
Hmm.
You know, Africa doesn't need any more charities. We don't need any more saviors. We need more CEOs. We need
Yes.
commerce, and we need commerce that, centers people, centers dignity, and that commerce will
Hmm.
demand infrastructure be built around it. And I
Yeah.
really believe that AI is, the big thing that's going to help us get to that fairer future if we're very intentional about how we use it.
Yeah. No, that is a brilliant answer. I think it's amazing. So now we're going to get into the real meat of our discussion. But thank you so much for sharing all of what you had to say about the continent of Africa, and also from coming from the roots of Nigeria. My fellow Nigeria sister, it's always great to speak to people who are doing inspiring things such as yourself. So we're looking forward to unpacking the incredible areas that you're touching on, and the areas that you want to see you're innovating within. So first off, you said that generosity, as you mentioned earlier, and purpose drive your work. So how do those values uh, uh, influence the way that you approach both leadership and your relationship with AI?
I think, like I said, generosity is pretty foundational for me.
Yeah.
So as a person, but also as a sort of strategic lever,
Yeah.
I don't see generosity as soft, or secondary.
Yeah.
I think that for me, if I think about leadership, I think the most generous leaders are often the most visionary,
Hmm.
because they're willing to they're willing to uplift others. They're willing to give without immediate gain, which allows you to
Hmm.
think more long term. And they create sort of structures that benefit more people than themselves, and that
Yeah.
replicates. In terms of AI, I think that does translate into how we build, how we lead.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's really important for me is that generosity means building much more inclusive tools.
Yeah.
It's great that, we're now in the era of kind of no code and low code tools, but I think that there is still, a cost obstacle for, for some organizations.
Right.
The largest organizations that, I worked at for a number of years have been investing in AI for, 10 years or more. But,
Hmm.
for kind of, thinking about TurnTroop, for our market is more of your medium-sized business and doesn't necessarily have that level of budget. So I think it's really important to democratize,
Hmm.
access to AI as much as possible. Um, Thinking from a business perspective, because
Yeah.
I'd say from an individual perspective, thankfully lots of us can get access to, the LLMs, ChatGPT, and the
Hmm.
like. But if I think about, the generosity point and kind of what that means to me, and within my business as well, I
Yeah.
think there's a big element about kind of sharing knowledge. I think one of the things that scuppers your much larger organizations that over time try to start to crumble is when everything kind of becomes very siloed.
Yeah.
So that element of generosity, and AI, one of the great things that AI has done is allowed so many people to get access to knowledge that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to get access to, or certainly wouldn't have been able to get access to as easily or as quickly.
Hmm.
And from looking at the Africa piece, for
Hmm.
me, the generosity point is making sure that this huge wave of innovation doesn't
Yeah.
leave people behind.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really important that we're constantly thinking about how we bring everybody along.
Hmm.
And you talked about purpose. I realize I haven't said much about purpose, but I think purpose is a really, really is another compass for me.
Hmm.
You know, purpose is the reason that, you know, I walked away from, you know, safe corporate roles and,
Yeah.
you know, being freelance and starting my own business.
Yeah.
Because for me, you know, I think we all have a purpose if you know, if we kind of dig deep enough.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's really important to find something that like excites you and scares you in equal measure.
Mm.
Um, and usually your purpose is somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for me, like purpose is going to be the thing that, you know, as we grow, is going to make us stop and go, you know, zoom out of, you know, data and figures and numbers and quarterly reports and say, what are we actually doing here? Who is it benefiting? Are we still kind of very aligned with what we
Hmm.
intend to do, which is change, you know, millions of lives ultimately is the big vision.
Yeah. No, I mean that's really interesting. I love the fact that you're talking about how the use of AI and your experience with it in your previous sort of more corporate working experiences
Hmm.
has it sort of stops people being siloed, and then the whole collaboration piece, bringing people together from all
Yeah.
different types of backgrounds to
Yeah.
using this powerful tool, but also the fact that there's so much potential within it. You've already touched on some of the reasons why you started your business, but I wanted to your startup. I wanted to ask what made you take the leap into founding your own company, and how has that decision changed your relationship with risk, trust, and technology?
I think I reached a point where I couldn't not do it in terms of
Interesting.
starting my company. You know, I'd spent a long time, a lot of years inside huge institutions,
Yeah.
um, and you know, kind of developed a niche. Um, I, you know, often being the one who was called in when things were already on fire. So it was kind of like, you know, if project stalled and everybody's
Yeah.
misaligned and it's not landing, call me, you know. You know, I'd sit in an interview and it would be, this project is 2 years behind. Nobody understands
Wow.
the we've built this technological black box. Stakeholders are angry. Rolla, can you come in and save it by Friday? Was basically the, you know, the vibe for a long time. And
Wow.
while that's, you know, exciting and hugely rewarding, because you do feel like you're making a difference, because
Yeah.
I think by nature I'm a fixer. So you're
Yeah.
basically coming in and you're tidying things up and you're fixing everything. But I think for me, what was not great is that one of the reasons that you run into these very messy transformations, there's so much money wasted on messy, stressful, and ultimately
Yeah.
unsuccessful transformations, especially, you know, and I'm talking specifically about big tech transformations
Yeah.
in businesses. Um, and I think the pattern was very much that it was always building tech around people
Hmm.
instead of trying to build tech with them.
Yeah.
So it was a case of, we have this goal, maybe it's a registry report that, you know, needs to be submitted, and we don't currently have the technology to actually gather the data, assess it, and be able to submit that report. We need you to build it. And it's like, you know, map out the process and to some extent map
Hmm.
out, you know, people and what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of actually not just implementing the transformation, but making it stick, people are the key.
Yes.
Um, and you know, I kind of saw that that was missing, and I felt like, you know, there has to be a better way. And if there is a better way, why don't I try and make that simpler and make it
Hmm.
more structured and make sure it's ethical, and it's rooted in social impact,
Yeah.
which is kind of what you know what I'm doing with TurnTroop. And you talked about risk, um, which the first thing that came to mind is that I think starting a business
Hmm.
teaches you to make peace with risk,
Yeah.
um, because you know I think fear you learn anyway, that fear
Hmm.
is it's not a stop sign, it's actually just data, it's actually just information.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and I yeah, and I think, you know, nothing, you know, great gets accomplished without there being a huge element of risk involved.
Hmm.
So, you know, I think the startup journey, the leap is a risk,
Yeah.
but actually building a business is constantly managing risk. And I think a lot of that maybe comes from being in financial services as well,
Hmm.
where it's not about eliminating risk, it's just
Hmm.
about managing risk,
Yeah.
and, you know, being very kind of cognizant of the risk that you're taking,
Hmm.
and what the potential benefit
Yeah,
is those risks.
that's really interesting to hear about all of those different points. I was going to ask, you described using that particular tool as or AI as your tool, you say you see it as your chief of staff, and how AI has helped you in your sort of early stage founders process of your startup. And what does where does it still, or where has it still fallen short for you though?
Um, I think at the end of the day, AI is not human. Is where it falls short for me, in the sense that I use sort of ChatGPT and Claude as kind
Yeah,
of like interns, the chief of staff you
yeah.
mentioned. So they're great as kind of a brainstorming partner to sort of clarify my thinking.
Hmm.
They're good in terms of structuring. If I just want to do a brain dump, you can help me
Hmm.
structure it. But I think what's missing is nuance. I
Yeah.
think that there's always that kind of element of judgment missing for me, because I think, AI can give you suggestions, but
Hmm.
it can't necessarily tell you what really matters most, where there's any kind of ambiguity, because that's human stuff, that's
Right.
human territory. So I feel like whilst these tools have been incredibly useful, and I'm talking specifically about the chatbots,
Hmm.
um, I think there is still that element of it's not human.
Right.
You know, I think, we're actually reaching a time now where, well, for me anyway, that it's becoming increasingly rare for me to receive like a long email or see like a long LinkedIn post
Mm.
that hasn't been somehow influenced by using a
Yeah.
chatbot. And for me, it's actually like quite it's really, really wonderful when I read a long post and I can
Yeah.
tell it's been written by a
Yeah.
human, and
Yeah.
there's no kind of element of chatbot in there, because you can feel it. You
Yeah.
can't necessarily put your finger on it. If people kind of edit it well, they can certainly, which is what I try to do, you can certainly
Hmm.
use a chatbot, but then make changes that make it sound more like you, etc.
Hmm.
But sometimes you can just tell that it was genuinely written like from the ground up, kind of all from the
Mm.
brain. That's such a nice, it seems like it's almost becoming an novelty, definitely on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, I'd say.
Yeah.
um
It's
you
becoming a
know
bit premium.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that is what's going to happen, right? I
Yeah.
think that people who can write and write really beautifully and in a way that, when you're reading it, your soul knows it was written by a human, are, going to be much, much more in demand.
Oh, interesting times that we're living in for sure.
Yeah.
So, just continuing on with your startup journey as a founder, how do you balance trusting your own instincts and using AI tools that can sort of that claim to know you better?
So I don't think any AI tools can know you better. Um, well, in the sense that I do think that there is something in all humans, that there's
Mhm.
an element of mystery. I very much embrace, kind of the mystery.
Okay.
So I think for me, in terms of trusting my own instincts, I think
Mhm.
I've honed that over time. And
Yeah.
so even if the AI is presenting me with information, I'm always, if I kind of take the time to listen, I'm always going to have a sense of what I think is right.
Yeah.
And I think maybe also because I know that in general, if you're using any of in general, not just, I was going to say chatbots, but actually AI in general needs to be
Mhm.
checked always.
Yeah.
So
Always.
I don't have this sense that I'm dealing with, this tool that knows more than me and is always going to be right.
Mhm.
Because there's so many elements in there, that can't, can't, I guess the word is kind of surpass what humans can do in that
Yeah.
element. But I haven't really found, the increase of, AI in my life and in my business causing me to doubt my instinct. If anything, it
Mhm.
makes me kind of hone my instinct even more and rely
Interesting.
on, you build up instincts over the course of a career, or over the
Yeah.
course of a life, in business and in life. You build up instincts about certain things. And I actually read something yesterday that was talking about how now there's research to actually quantify, like, the value of I think they use kind of traders, financial traders,
Yeah.
that, like, instinct is a real thing,
Yeah.
and you can actually make better decisions by using your instinct, and it increases over kind of years of experience. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think for me, with AI tools that claim to know better, I know they don't. They'll be
Yeah.
quicker for sure,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they don't. They
Yeah.
don't always know better.
I think it's really interesting as well, like the importance of having sort of that critical. You demonstrate through your business and through your skills that ability to
Oh,
critically
I've
assess.
lost the sound.
Don't worry, we can still
Why?
keep
Oh, you're
talking.
back. You're back. Sorry,
Yeah.
I lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't
Sure,
worry. Dave will edit that bit out.
sure.
So I was going to
Okay.
say as well, just another thing. Don't worry if the sound goes or if the video from your end sounds like it's not sort of stable. Don't worry about it. We'll just keep going because
Yeah.
it's
Just
still
keep
sort of
going. Okay.
rendering. Yeah,
Sure.
so that's fine. Um, but sorry, going back to the Dave. So going back to the talk, our discussion. I think
Sorry.
it's that
Sing
whole.
that again. The
I was
I can hear you, but the background noise was just got a little bit loud. Then, so say that bit again.
okay. I was just going to say, so Dave, starting from here, um, critical thinking. So that it's just through your experience of work, and also your experience of your journey of your startup, to critically assess any information that comes through as a key component that you demonstrate, and that's an expectation that you would have for reviewing any piece of work that comes through using any of the
Yeah.
AI tools, which is
Yeah.
absolutely understandable. So,
Yeah.
so moving on to my next question, how can founders and leaders stay emotionally present when AI is designed to optimize for output and not empathy?
So, I mean, the key thing is that I think as people, we don't have to be the AI. We just have to use it. It's a tool.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of staying emotionally present, it's about keying into what makes you human. And I think
Hmm.
as, kind of a leader, you set the tone. And, if
Yeah.
it's always rushing, automating, outsourcing every interaction, sending messages and basically just going, feelings don't matter here, things just need to get done.
Hmm.
It's dangerous. And, there is a risk that more use of AI and kind of optimizing does lead us to that point where it's just about
Yeah.
efficiency, getting things done. But I think, you know, when you're in leadership, you're founding a startup, you need to be very intentional about lots of things, and I think emotional
Hmm.
presence is one of them.
Yeah.
In the sense, like I said, you need to make sure that you're asking real questions, and you're kind of giving your team necessary space to take time to kind of understand problems before solving for them. Because I think that one of the things that is slowly dying is this idea of move fast, break things.
Hmm.
Because I think there is a slightly slower pace
Yeah.
that allows you to that is more ethical and more responsible, and means that you're not just focusing on the end result, but you're actually focusing on the impact
Yeah.
of everyone, and that's both in your direct team, but also when we think about responsible and ethical AI, the world, in
Hmm.
terms of your use of AI, instead of just this very narrow focus on the problem and solving the problem, and kind of screw anything that's
Yeah.
outside of that. And I think as a founder or as a leader, that sort of being able to have enough empathy to include
Hmm.
people and take people on the journey. I think it's not it's not a luxury. It's like a really really core part of being a
Yeah.
successful leader. And there's
Yeah.
loads of data as well, to
Yeah.
show kind of how companies that have empathetic leaders are way more successful. So,
Hmm.
for me, it just makes sense. But I also see
Okay.
how easy it is because of the pace of change
Yeah.
with AI. how easy it is to get very carried away and forget about
Hmm.
people. Okay.
Hmm. Good. Okay, thank you for that. And then do you think AI is making it harder or easier to form genuine working relationships in a distributed or remote first world?
I mean, both. I mentioned before that AI is a tool. Your AI
Hmm.
is a technology, but there's various tools within that
Yeah,
technology, and like any tool, it just depends how you use it.
yeah.
I think on one hand, AI can help sort of bridge gaps, and the big vision for me with my company is enabling the millions of incredibly talented people that we have in Africa who
Hmm.
don't have work to be able to access very like high quality roles
Yeah.
in what I'm hoping is a fantastic environment to work in.
Hmm.
And AI can help bridge that gap between someone who's capable and willing to work versus organizations in the UK, Europe, US that need AI talent, but there's a well documented global shortage
Yeah.
in AI talent. So both the technology in terms of the actual tooling that allows you to bridge that gap, but also just the advancement of AI and the interest in it, and the pace of AI adoption can
Hmm.
massively bridge that gap in this kind of distributed world, like I said.
Yeah.
But I think if we think about it in terms of let's take your chatbots,
Yeah.
and the fact that AI now allows you to summarize conversations. You can pick out actions, you can pick out context,
Hmm.
and in those ways it can kind of help us work better together.
Yeah.
But it can also become a crutch in the sense that if we start replacing sort of check-ins with
Yeah.
dashboards, because it's so easy now to create those, or if rather than giving feedback to employee feedback, we're kind of giving people auto-generated insights from
Mm.
ChatGPT, we're definitely going to lose something.
Yeah.
So I don't know that AI is making it harder or easier. Again, it's kind of up to individuals how they choose to use it. I mean,
Hmm.
it's similar to kind of mobile phones, and the
Yeah.
fact that barely anybody picks up the phone anymore. So there are
Mm.
some people that and maybe have used mobile phones to replace their social life. They don't see their friends anymore. They just WhatsApp them and that's it. But
Mm.
the reality is most people haven't. Most people, still see their friends, still go out and
Yeah.
socialize. So I think it's similar with AI. I think you need to be intentional.
Hmm.
Genuine relationships need intentionality.
Yeah.
Um,
No.
so, and AI can support that, but it can't
Mm.
replace that.
Yeah. I think that's a very sound answer. Um, uh, so my next question is, why do you think it is important to you to build an AI platform that's powered by African talent? And how does that change the world's narrative around innovation?
So I think one of the big drivers for me was the world needs to know kind of what we have in Africa.
Yes,
I
make
think
it
there
known, make it plain. Not
I
that I'm
think
biased.
of course not, of course not. But I think the big stat is that by 2030, 1 in 3 people of working age will be African. 1 in 3.
Yes.
It's huge. So
Wow.
even if you're not biased, you should be,
Hmm.
because you have this massive population and you have this incredibly young, incredibly savvy population that's
Hmm.
growing and is gonna define something about the world. So
Hmm.
why don't we shape it to
Hmm.
define, something that's great and something that creates, kind of equity across the globe.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, the big dream is to help shift how the world sees Africa
Yeah.
by showing what African talent is truly capable of globally. Because I think,
Hmm.
so far we have, if we look at if we think about outsourcing maybe and organizations that are already using African talent, a lot of it
Yeah.
is lower skilled. So a lot of it
Yeah.
is, a lot of lower skilled jobs. It's
Hmm.
not necessarily, you want a very senior, let's say AI engineer. You're
Yeah.
not necessarily thinking Africa first. Africa's
Yeah.
reputation is developing around developers. So there is
Yeah.
an increasing reputation around developers and
Nice.
software engineers, but it's not enough.
Hmm.
And so for me, the big dream is, I want to get to where people say, if you want the best tech talent in the world, you want the
Yeah.
best talent, go to Africa. So
Hmm.
same way you think about Silicon Valley for startups, you think about Lagos,
Hmm.
Accra, Nairobi when you're thinking about serious tech talent. And one of the ways that, I'm working
Yeah.
towards that, I want to build this sort of world class AI hub.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that I forgot the last part of your question. I was trying to recall the last part of your question. Can you
No,
remind me?
no. The last part of the question is just to remind you, and how does that change the political narrative around innovation?
Yeah. And I think I've kind of touched on it already, but I think
Yeah.
it it's a mindset that people think of African talent in a very different light to how they think of Africa now. I think one of the things I'm mindful of with this
Mm,
massive population growth is exploitation potentially. And there
indeed.
have been, there's been a very significant period in history that we're all aware of where Africa was deeply, deeply exploited. And, I think the key thing for me is, as we've mentioned about AI and it being a tool, and it,
Hmm.
for me, AI is neutral. It's not good, it's not bad,
Hmm.
but it can be used for bad
Hmm.
things. It can also be used for good
Hmm.
things. So I'm very
Hmm.
kind of conscious that, I want to be part of shaping this narrative that ensures that Africa is not exploited as a result of AI, but
Yeah.
Africa is known
Yeah.
as kind of this global talent hub, and by virtue of that, very much has a seat on the table, because of how
Yeah.
good our talent is. That's kind of,
Yeah.
the part that I would love to get to.
Mhm. I think as well, from the work that you're doing and sharing concept with others as well, is that actually with Africa having a seat at the table, it's actually also driving the direction of how this particular tool can help benefit the entire continent as well. So continuing on with that theme, what are some of the cultural blind spots that you have seen in mainstream AI tools? And then the second part of the question is, how do you think they affect how we relate to each other across the borders?
Whilst, I think for me, whilst I haven't necessarily seen something that I felt was a cultural blind spot for me. Um, Given that I'm, quite cross-cultural, I live in the UK. I've lived here for
Mhm.
most of my life, but I also have the African connection. Um, but I'm well aware of all of the issues that we've seen with various AI tools and AI technologies, because we know that on kinds of models and the materials that they're being trained with, often people that look like you and me are not part of that
Yeah.
equation.
Mhm.
So I think tied to earlier points around generosity and
Mhm.
leveling the playing field and choosing to use AI for good, I think AI needs to serve everyone. And if
Yeah.
we want to serve everyone, then everyone needs to be at the table.
Yeah.
And at the moment, everyone is at the table. So I think
Mhm.
that's definitely something that I'm very conscious of. And in terms of what I'm building, I'm very clear that what we're building is a responsible AI solution,
Yeah.
and making sure that everybody is at the table and we don't end up, we've seen kind of the various things in the news, and some quite serious things, especially when AI is used for crime and facial recognition and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, so rather than AI being used for crime, AI being used by the police, and facial recognition technology
Mhm.
failing, and resulting in very serious consequences for people. So I think for me, I don't have a sort of, a funny story about a cultural blind spot I've seen, but I know they're there. And more than
Yeah.
just cultural, I think there's very, very serious blind spots,
Yeah.
that need to be rectified.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very sort of comprehensive sort of view, and yeah, I appreciate you sharing that your thoughts on that. Um, how My next question is, how do we ensure that AI that we're building doesn't replicate the same biases and hierarchies that already exist in the global economy?
I think the first step is just to acknowledge that
Hmm.
these inequalities exist.
Yeah.
Because I think part of the issue is, in certain circles, not even being allowed to acknowledge that there are inequalities. Um,
Mm.
and I think, sort of the next step is building teams that are diverse. Similar to my
Hmm.
point earlier, just the teams that are actually working with AI are diverse across
Hmm.
race, gender, geography, class, which is
Yeah.
another one. As well as I think rather than just having engineers working on problems, bringing in
Yeah.
sociologists, bringing in historians, bringing
Hmm.
in people that are concerned about ethics, and the
Hmm.
responsible element. Um, so I think that in order to move forward and not replicate the inequalities that exist now, I think it takes
Hmm.
so much more intentionality, because if not, we're just going to build what exists now, which is still a deeply,
Yeah.
deeply, deeply unequal society. And I think for
Hmm.
me, very early in this journey came a sort of
Mm.
decision to focus on not just enabling AI adoption, but enabling responsible, ethical AI adoption,
Yeah.
um, is a really, really key tenet for me. Because I
Hmm.
think we all have to kind of put our money where our mouths are, and
Yeah.
actually, do something, as opposed
Hmm.
to, I guess, just blindly follow, pick the best tool,
Yeah.
and oh well, to that further deepening the inequalities that we've already got in society, and that's just not an option for me.
It's good. It's not an option. I agree wholeheartedly. So wanted to ask, what does I was thinking about the future of work and around the area of leadership and your experience of it. What does emotional intelligence or emotionally intelligent leadership look like within a tech company, and especially one that works with AI?
So I think emotional intelligence leadership looks the same.
Hmm.
Well, should look the
Yeah.
same in every
Okay.
company, irrespective of whether it's tech or not.
Yeah.
I think maybe the assumption is that in tech, you get a certain type of character that perhaps
Hmm.
doesn't always lend itself to, being very, very good at emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
But for me, emotional intelligence as a leader shows up as some of the stuff that I've talked about before, which is
Hmm.
compassion, asking questions.
Yeah.
It requires you to slow down. I
Yeah.
think the sort of hustle culture that we were all embracing, a few years ago,
Mm.
always prioritizes speed,
Yeah.
and leaders in particular, because with kind of the advancements in technology, as a leader, you have to stay constantly connected. There just there's never enough hours in the day, it seems.
Hmm.
um, and I think that meant that more and more emotional intelligence, and actually talking to people and making space
Mm.
for to actually process things and have
Yeah.
questions, all of that very slowly kind of went out the window,
Hmm.
even in industries where that wasn't the case before. There's some industries have
Mm.
always been like that, if you think about maybe banking or whatever, but
Mm.
even in industries where it was all a bit more compassionate, even that started to go out the window. So I think that I kind of labor on that point about speed, because I think that's probably the biggest entry point to being emotionally intelligent as a leader, is slowing down below
Yeah.
kind of the natural pace that you want to go at. And beyond that, it's really engaging with your team, it's asking questions, it's creating an environment where people feel safe, where people have psychological
Mm.
safety, where they feel like they can make
Yeah.
mistakes, they feel like they can try new things. And that's the only way you
Hmm.
innovate as well. Because I think
Yeah.
I have lots of very developed theories about innovation and having departments of innovation in companies that I won't bore you
Hmm.
with, but basically, I don't believe in this idea of having a department of innovation, because what you
Yeah.
need is actually an organization where every single employee has the space and the
Yeah.
tools and the knowledge to be able to innovate and come up with new ideas relative to
Yeah.
their role. That's how you have a
Hmm.
truly innovative company.
Hmm.
But that
Yeah.
requires, that kind of intentionality, and it requires leaders that
Hmm.
have enough of the emotional intelligence to figure out that actually we're working with people, and the things that
Yes.
motivate people and help people to do their best work and help them to thrive haven't really changed. You know,
Hmm.
what has changed are, our expectations and the demands and all of that.
Hmm.
And, I think that whilst slowing down, I always call it slowing down
Hmm.
to get faster, because actually
Interesting.
you slow
Very
down,
good
but
phrase.
ultimately the result that you end up with is much better than what you would have got when you were kind of moving
Hmm.
fast and breaking things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a roundabout answer to the emotional intelligence point, but ultimately leaders need to slow down. We all need to slow down.
Yeah.
I read a great book called Slow Productivity that I would really, really recommend.
Ah.
It
Oh,
helps to,
who do you know who the author is? And perhaps you
I
could
can
drop that
very
in the show
quickly Google
notes.
it. He wrote Deep Work,
Yeah.
but my memory is not my strength.
Yeah.
So,
No, we can put that in the show notes. Don't worry, that could be added
okay.
later.
Oh, Cal
So,
Newport name.
sorry, could you repeat that name of the person again?
Cal, so CAL, and then surname is
Hmm.
Newport,
Okay,
NEWPORT.
brilliant. Well, we'll put the reference to Candle Port's book in the show notes, because that is definitely that whole notion of being able to be reflective in order to make the best decisions going forward.
Exactly.
It helps hugely. Could you, if you could reimagine our collective relationship with AI, what's one value or principle you'd want embedded into the heart of every system?
I think that I would go back to generosity actually, um, because I think that just encompasses the idea of needing to bring everybody along. Um, I
Yeah.
think that if that value were embedded, we would do away with the idea of, building models that don't represent society. We would do away with the idea, the kind of the cost of AI at the moment, and not just in terms of financial
Mhm.
cost, but the cost of the environment. If we had this principle of generosity embedded and this
Yeah.
principle of including everybody and inclusion, I didn't want to use the word inclusion, but it kind of is
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then I think that we would end up with AI having a net positive impact on the world,
Yeah.
as opposed to potentially where we are today.
Hmm.
If we don't have kind of technological advancement in terms of the energy element of AI,
Hmm.
then we're potentially the world is gonna end up more worse off
Yeah.
because of widespread adoption of AI.
Hmm.
So you said one word, but it's kind of generosity and inclusion, and yeah, bringing everybody along.
I think that's a great
Those are
answer.
my five
And
values.
yeah, no, no, that I think it's just a very uh, holistic way of reimagining how this tool could be used and to benefit society in a wider level. I mean, as I said, relationships with AI is concerned about how we interconnect. It's about whether or not AI helps to enhance or fracture relationships. And we're built to being
Mm.
in connection and in close relationship with each other. So how that your answer, I feel that definitely
Yeah.
answers that and brings certainly the listener's mind to a different perspective on how this particular tool can be used. So moving into our closing section, and it's a bit more sort of light touch, bit of fun, in style of sort of Love Island, looking at the warm fuzzies of a relationship and the ick. So, um, with regards to the warm fuzzies, What has been a powerful lesson that you've been given as a gift within a relationship?
So I think that one of the biggest gifts that relationships have given me is probably the reminder that I'm not an island. Um, I think we glorify independence so much,
Mhm.
and I grew up with kind of Destiny's Child, literally, independent woman. That and it's a badge of honor.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, so I think we almost forget that life is meant to be lived with others.
yeah,
um and I heard a talk recently by Arthur C. Brooks,
yes,
about this incredible organism called Pando.
yes.
um and it looks like a massive forest, and it's acres and acres and acres of
Mm,
trees in Utah, but underneath it's actually just one single living organism, and one
amazing.
root system. And that image really stuck with me because it's kind of how I think about relationships, this sense that we
Hmm.
may look separate on the surface. You see like tens of thousands of individual trees, but
Yeah,
actually underneath we're all very deeply connected.
yeah,
um so I think that's the first lesson, is kind of, I'm not an island.
yeah,
And then on the flip side is actually the opposite, which is,
mm,
that's, I think, my experience of relationships have taught me that actually I need to bet on myself. I can bet on
yeah,
myself, and I should bet on myself.
yeah,
um and and I think that means learning not to ask for permission, don't wait for
mm,
validation, and don't depend on anybody else to believe in your vision before you do.
yeah,
I've had to walk away from toxic environments, step
hmm,
into unknown, of starting a business, but through that, always kind of trust that I would land on my feet.
yeah,
And I think the more you do that over time, you kind of build that muscle,
yeah, yeah,
that sort of kind of self trust,
mm,
which is transformational. So yeah, I think those
yeah,
are the two lessons. I'm not an island, and bet on yourself.
yeah. Love it. And we'll make reference to that off Seabrook reference that you made earlier. We'll put that in the show notes as well because he's
Sure.
an absolute G. I love all what he had to say. Um,
Amazing, amazing.
yeah. And then what's been the ick? What's been a regret or a lesson that you've received from a relationship?
Okay, so the reason I'm laughing is the first thing to say is I love this question, because it's catchy, and the
Yeah,
reference, and if you know, you know. But
yeah,
I hate the concept of ick because it's so judgmental.
yeah.
It's like I see it as kind of like emotional fast food because it's so instant,
Ooh.
it's so shallow.
Yeah,
And it kind of usually says more about the person that's feeling the ick than the other person.
that's very
But
insightful.
having said that, my biggest ick
Yeah,
is people who are totally different at work than they are in real life. I find it very
yeah.
you encounter people that they're a loving spouse, they're an amazing friend, you meet
Mm,
their kids, and their kids are obsessed with them, they're such doting
mm,
parents, but
yeah,
they turn into a terror the moment that they're in this corporate setting.
yeah,
um
yeah,
and I'm not saying you need to bring your weekend, weekend vibes into the
yeah,
boardroom, but just basic decency is not negotiable. I
no,
think, and I'm a
agreed.
real believer that you can be assertive without being aggressive.
Yes,
It's doable,
yeah,
and you can be super results driven, but you can still show compassion to other people.
yeah,
Um, and this sort of trope of the high performer being used as an excuse for bad behavior
mm,
just is, now it doesn't make any sense, because there's
yeah, yeah,
loads of data that tells us the opposite, that these toxic top performers tank businesses. So I just don't
yeah,
understand why this is still a thing.
yeah,
And I think even more so with the new generation in the workforce, I think, Gen
yeah,
Z and below are not really
mm,
standing for, coming to work to be treated, very,
yeah,
very poorly. So yeah, that's when I thought about ick, that was like ick, ick, ick. People who are not
yeah,
authentic and just, choose to make other people's lives very difficult.
yeah.
Yeah, no.
I think that's
not
a
into it.
very, very, I wholeheartedly concur with that perspective. You need to be if you're the same, if you're like this in the workplace, then you are, chances are you're like that actually at home. So to have
In
that
some,
incongruity, it
yeah,
doesn't really work. It does
yeah,
never really work. And
yeah,
like you
yeah,
say, if it affects the bottom line at the end of the day as well, and also just not even the bottom line with regards to profitability, but with regards to sort of people's well-being and the
yeah,
fact that
exactly.
an individual might actually be a drain and people don't want to work with them, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have lots to say about that, but this is not my interview. This is yours. And then the final question is just to refocus it around sort of AI and relationships, and how do these work out if you were in relation to or in the sort of the general theme of relationship with AI? How do you think these work together?
So, I think if I frame it in terms of, what I just talked about, which is bet on yourself, build with
Hmm.
others, in community, essentially, and be kind. Don't be
Hmm.
a mean person.
Mm.
I think the first thing is what I, mentioned previously, which is that, I see AI as neutral. It's not good or bad. It's just a mirror.
Yeah.
So it
Yes.
reflects whatever we put into it.
Yeah.
So I think that, if we show up with, it's kind of exploitation and fear and scarcity, AI is going to amplify that. And
Yeah.
if we lead instead with, sort of ethics and inclusion and generosity, AI is going to amplify that as well.
Hmm.
And I think that where we are now with AI, I see so many parallels with, kind of the early days of the internet.
Mm.
Not right at the beginning because I wasn't born, but or I would have been a very baby. But I remember sort of growing up in, like the late 90s, early 2000s when
Yeah.
not every company had a website, and that wasn't
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
There was a time when, people thought, online shopping would never catch on because people would
Mm.
always go into shops.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a very hilarious article from Newsweek, I think it is.
Yeah.
Time or Newsweek, I think it's Newsweek. It's from the 90s, and it's actually really funny to read
Yeah.
now because
Okay.
there's like, it says things like, oh, they're predicting we'll buy books and newspapers on the internet. Sure, who's going to do that kind of thing?
Yeah.
That is just exactly, is standard for us now.
Yeah.
Back people were either afraid of, or
Mm.
the AI is kind of following a very similar adoption curve
Yes.
to the internet and other new technologies. If you start off with the hype, then you get the fear. Everyone's very afraid
Yeah.
of what's going to happen, so you get pushback. But then you start to get the regulation, which then
Hmm.
kind of settles everything and then makes sort of integration possible, and then it becomes mainstream. It becomes run of the mill.
Okay.
Um, and while all of that cycle, adoption cycle is happening, the
Yeah.
AI is evolving. It's getting smarter. It's getting faster. It's getting more
Hmm.
accessible. So I think for me, the question isn't, is AI going to change things? It's more, how do we shape what that change looks like? And I think when I think about the bet on yourself, the building
Yeah.
community, the be kind, I think the bet on yourself is, I love that AI probably makes it easier to start a business. It doesn't make it easier to be successful in business though.
No.
But I love that it kind of
Yes.
um, enables that, and I really celebrate that. And I did a little ChatGPT tutorial for my parents the other day, which was very sweet because
Oh.
oh my gosh, this is going to be so useful. This is so good. But so
Oh.
I'm very, very AI, kind of AI positive and encouraging people to use it, and especially if it allows people to kind of bet on themselves
Yeah.
and get out there
Yeah.
and do.
Yeah.
But the build with others, the community element, the be kind element, I think that you know we just need to remember to be human. We get to decide if we use AI responsibly,
Yeah.
and I said earlier, we vote with our money or our clicks and our choices, and
Yeah.
we can support the builders that prioritize ethics, prioritize
Hmm.
sustainability, um, and I think one of the things I mentioned earlier about, just loving like a long LinkedIn post that was written by a
Yeah.
person and not not an AI chatbot.
Mm.
And I think that's really beautiful. Like, we all have these quirks and weird sentence structure and warmth,
Yeah.
and if you pay attention, you can really feel that in things that are human created. And yeah, I
That's so
think
true.
that humans are the best, so we should preserve that. And so I hope, kind of in my relationship and our collective relationship with AI and
Yeah.
how that works out in the future, I hope that, yeah, we continue to be human, and preserve that element as much as
Awesome.
possible.
Well, I think that's a fabulous note to end our interview on, about
Okay.
being human and being kind.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Rola, and thank you for all your insight and your wisdom, and all the jokes that you shared as well. And also all the references that we've made, we'll put those in the show notes. But thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time. It's been wonderful to have you
Thank
on.
you. Thank you.
Before you go, where can people find you? What's the best way people can connect with you? And have you got anything coming up that you want to share?
Yeah, I think, if you've liked kind of what you've heard, and you want more information, then head to TurnTroop.com. So TurnTroop, TurnTroop.com, and
Mhm.
sign up for our newsletter so that you can get, alerts as we start to release product.
Mhm.
And also you can connect with us. And then also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So I'm Rola Aina on LinkedIn. So the next phase for us is, kind of building, our MVP, and
Mhm.
really, really nailing, that sort of product market fit, as well as building the community and continuing to kind of deepen, relationships, in Nigeria specifically, as a starting point in Africa. So yeah, I think for me the big thing would be just if there are people that this resonated with, that they get in
Mm.
touch, we can kind of figure out, yeah, if they can be part of the journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And yeah, this is the end of Relationships with AI with Rola Aina. Thanks so much for being on my show. Take
Thank
care.
you.
See
Take
you
care.
later.